Okay, good morning. There we have one more. Don't close it completely because people can't get in. Yeah. Can you see where you're going? Yes, I know. Hello. So today, the vast collection of the royals in Spain. It's a huge program. It's going to be long, and I tell you, I cut so much. Always heartbroken, but this is the only way. Pardon? You speak a little louder. Yes, okay, it's here, and I'm going to put the subtitles anyway. So there we are. So a very large collection that we'll see comes in stages. There are some particular heads that are more inclined to collect art because they had a longer reign or because they had the money at the time. And as I say, the taste to it also. So without waiting, we're going to go for the next one. And sorry, here I need to. Okay, so a map that you've already seen, but shows the Reconquista, because this is really where everything started. So as you know, in 711, the Moors invaded from the south, and within 40 years, the whole of Spain was taken, except for that little part on the very top, the Asturias, that where they all gathered because people were fleeing, and at that time the Asturias were overpopulated because everybody had fled there, and they started pushing back. And from 750 to 1492, when finally the south of Andalusia was taken to, the Moors occupied less and less of the country, but in a very dramatic fashion. So we really have to look at 1492 as the beginning of the dynasty of the Catholic kings. Here's just an idea in 1470, so just before the Moors were expelled from Spain, only Granada, that part was still in their hands. But this is kind of in a general way, the way Europe looked. So what is important for us is to see the Duchy of Burgundy that included at that time the Duchy of Burgundy in France, plus all the territories of Flanders and what is southern Belgium and a little part of what is now northern France, northeastern France. And this is, of course, going to be very important because they're going to ally with Castile and Aragon. So it is with the alliance between these two, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, that we see the beginning of the dynasty in Spain. Very interesting because to see a woman that had as much power, because Castile was larger than Aragon, and as we know, the Spanish, which in Spain would be called Castellan, really came from being only a part of the language spoken in Spain to taking the entire country. So they wed in 1471, I think, if I remember. They wed in 1471 and she became the Queen of Castile from 71 and died in 1504. And he became the King of Castile and Leon in 79 and died in 1516. As they were at war most of the time trying to reconcile the whole of the country, they didn't have really a chance to do a lot of collecting, but they inherited some works that were coming from each of the family. And it's really difficult because there was not really an inventory. It's difficult to know exactly what comes from that time. What is important during the reign is the Treaty of Tordesillas. And the Treaty of Tordesillas, of which you see an original page here, beautifully written at that time, is going to decide, and this was decided by the Pope, because both countries were so dominant as far as the maritime power, if you want. The Pope decided he was going to cut the planet in two. And literally, all you see in red and Spain and there was for Spain. And all the thing that you see in dark green was for Portugal. And so they could not go to in the other place. So for example, a good example, as you can see, Portugal had Africa. And so when there was a slave trade, only the Portuguese could go get the slaves from Africa and then take them up to Spain, and then Spain could take them to the New World, Mexico, and so on, and Peru. So it was done in collaboration, but the Spanish people couldn't go there. So it was forbidden. So a very important treaty. As you can see, Brazil is very little at that time. It became much larger, and the Portuguese, with the fact that they had to really survey the country, the Spaniards were not interested in that. And so, of course, this became much larger, and you have the whole of Brazil that speaks Portuguese or Brazilian. It's slightly different. Showing you now the genealogy, it's always extraordinary to see that genealogy of this, because it touches the whole of Europe. So we have Ferdinand and Isabella here that get married and have they actually have four children: Don Juan, Joanna, Catherine, and they have Isabella, they don't talk about here. On the other hand, you have the Habsburg family, so originally in Austria, but also in charge, being the emperor of the German country. And it is headed by Maximilian, who marries Mary of Burgundy. And this is where we tie in with the Low Countries and the Duchy of Burgundy. At that time, Mary was the only heir of the Dukes of Burgundy, the richest woman in Europe. She was called Mary the Rich. And unfortunately for her, she died in a horseback accident after giving birth to two children, Philip and Margaret. The decision was at that time by Maximilian to have a double marriage with the crown of Spain, which, as you can imagine, made an incredibly powerful alliance. And so Philip the Handsome married Joanna, and Margaret married Don Juan. Don Juan was, after the death of his sister Isabel, became the successor to the throne of Spain. And unfortunately for him, he was born very weak and then was constantly sick. They never thought he was going to come to adult age, but he did. And when Margaret was betrothed to him, she came to Spain, and these two got along extremely well, above all expectation. And they were spending the entire time together and had fun, and apparently spent the nights most of the time together, which made people very anxious because he wasn't strong enough for it, which is quite interesting. And the result is that when his sister, one of his sisters, married the King of Portugal, he was on his way to Portugal to attend the wedding. He died on the way. And he left Margaret behind, who was pregnant, and unfortunately, she had a stillborn child. And so that line was cut short. And Margaret was sent back to the Low Countries, where she was coming from. So the inheritor of the throne is now the brother-in-law of Don Juan is Philip, who is the descendant of the Burgundian and of the Habsburg. And these two have a whole series of children who are going to become absolutely instrumental in tying up with all the royalties in Europe. So you see that, and I often think of that. I say, okay, the guys that become king or duke or whatever, but the girls are really treated, okay, you marry him and you give him kids because that's the whole idea. And you die because they die in childbirth. Don't forget, women's age maximum, average age at that time was 23 for a woman.
Oh, wow.
It's incredible when you think about it. It of course includes children that died in a very young age. But so anyway, Philip and Joanna is there. Joanna was unfortunately once Philip became king, she was considered unstable mentally, and they very quickly interned her in a convent. And she was nicknamed Joanna Jeanne la Folle, the insane. And so the history around that is very, very strange. Some people say she was absolutely not insane, but many said she was extremely unstable. And that was the fact that otherwise she would have been the queen, because her husband died in 1519, very young too. So coming from there, we have Catherine, the sister of Don Juan and Joanna. Mary is the first wife of Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, the famous one that he wanted to divorce and created the Church of England because the Pope refused the divorce. The children, you have Eleanor, the oldest one, is going to marry the King Francis I of France. Charles V is going to become the heir there, and as his father dies very young, he's going to be king at age 19. He becomes king of Spain before becoming the emperor. Isabella is going to marry Christian of Denmark and Sweden. Ferdinand is the frustrated guy, the frustrated brother, who finally is going to inherit the whole Germanic side, but not until Charles V abdicates. Mary is marrying the King of Hungary. Catherine marries the King of Portugal. And then, of course, this is it for them. Charles V is going to have Philip II as an heir, and is going to marry 4 times because his wives die in childbirth and he can't get a male heir. And so he marries first Mary of Portugal, who is the daughter of Catherine, talk about inbreeding, Mary of England. And so Philip for a while was King of England too. Elizabeth of Valois, who is the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine. Elizabeth of Valois, daughter of Catherine of Medici. And then you have Anne of Austria, who is going to the last wife. And when he died, Philip wanted to marry her sister, but she was 16. At that time, he was in his late 40s. And she decided on her way from Austria to Spain to stop the carriage and enter a convent. And she became a nun. And she decided, I'm not going to die at 20 giving birth to my 3rd child, you know. So Philip never remarried after that. So as I mentioned, and we'll talk about it later on, when Charles V abdicates in 1556, he realized that his empire is too large to be administered by one person. And so he's going to split his empire between 2 people. One is going to be Philip II, who is going to have Spain, the Low Countries, and the New World. And Ferdinand is going to have Austria and be the emperors of the Germanic countries. And also, we'll see it on the map, the southern part of Italy and part in Sardinia. So at that time, Ferdinand finally is recognized because he thought he was never going to do anything. And so Ferdinand becomes then the father of the Austrian lineage. It's a complicated story, but it's interesting because you see that most of the countries in Europe are touched by that alliance. Sorry, that's not what yeah, here we are. So Margaret of Austria, I mentioned, marries Don Juan, a happy marriage that lasts a year. And unfortunately, he dies and she goes back to the Low Countries. What is interesting is that she had been already betrothed before marrying Don Juan. She had been promised to the king of France, the young, before he became the king. And she was sent to the court in France, and at the age of 12, they changed their mind. And they said, no, actually, the king is going to marry Anne of Brittany. And so they sent her back to the Low Countries, and then she married Don Juan. And as she said, she was the virgin wife of two. But it's from Philip the Handsome and Johanna that comes that whole group of people. Philip was quite interested in art, but as you know, his reign was pretty short, and just 1 year. When he became king in 1506, he died the same year. He was quite interested in art, and particularly interested in Hieronymus Bosch. This is the famous Garden of Earthly Delight, but this is a triptych. So when it's closed, you have this grisaille painting on the outside showing on the left St. James, Santiago de Compostela, so St. James as a pilgrim. And then on the other side, you have St. Bavo, which is a famous saint in northern Belgium. When you open the triptych, you have that incredible. This is the Last Judgment, not the Garden of the Earthly Delight. So it's the Last Judgment. This is actually another version of the original that has been lost. But this was a very important painting by Hieronymus Bosch, where you have on the left, you have the Garden of Eden with the story of Adam and Eve. You can see here the creation of Adam and Eve. You have the temptation here, and then the angel that kicks them out of Eden. In the center, you have the Last Judgment with Christ on the top, and then that terrible scene of the it's even before going to hell, but that's really that very typical art of Hieronymus Bosch that has these incredibly odd figures that are quite closely tied, by the way, to alchemy. His father-in-law was an alchemist, we can call pharmacist in a sense, what we would call now, but there was no pharmacist at that time. And many of these figures have been paralleled and compared to a lot of the symbolism of alchemy. And then on the right, you have hell. The oldest son of that couple was Charles V. He became king of Spain in 1516, and abdicated in 1556. He became Holy Roman Emperor in 1519 and abdicated the same year for the same thing. He married Isabella of Portugal, who became Queen of Spain in 26 when she married him, and Holy Roman Empress in 30 because she had to go through a whole acceptance by the Pope. As you can see, Charles is dressed in black, and this is really a custom that started in the 14th century, but the black that seems to be very austere was thought to be just that reason that they were austere people, but in fact it was considered very elegant and was picked up by them because it was the most expensive dye for costumes, the dye for black was very difficult to obtain, to have a deep black. And so it became a monopoly of the aristocracy and particularly of the kings. And so you have already the Duke of Burgundy, we'll see him later, who is dressed in black, but the whole 16th and 17th century in Spain, the king and the emperor will be dressed in black. So what Charles is going to do very quickly, at that time, the royalties are not based in one place. They don't have one palace. They move from one palace to the other. For the good reason is that the court was extremely numerous. There were lots of people around the king. And a village couldn't sustain such a large group of people. So they had to exhaust the resources of one village, and then they would move to another palace where they could go hunting and so on, and then dip into all the grains and everything that was in that village, and then move to another one. But he is the one that built El Pardo, which is north of Madrid. And here's by Luis de Vega, the Pardo, that was both a palace but also a monastery. It was built at first by the King Enrique III of Castile in 1406, but and also because it was surrounded by forest, and so the king could hunt a lot. Hunting was only reserved to the aristocracy and to the king. General people could not, were absolutely forbidden to hunt. So unfortunately, so Charles transformed it in a palace, but in 1604, a massive fire destroyed many of the paintings, including masterpieces of Titian that were in that place. And here you can see it after restoration. I have to talk a little more about Margaret of Austria that was sent back to the Low Countries. And then she married the Duke of Savoy and had happy 3 years with him, where he was hunting and she was taking care of the administration of the place. Very smart woman. But unfortunately for him, he died 3 years after they got married. And once for all, she decided, no, I'm going back and I'm not remarrying anything. I'm just staying there. And very quickly, her nephew, Charles V, knowing the intelligence of his aunt, decided to make her the governess of the Low Countries. And we'll see that this was quite a good place. She was an excellent administrator. She was Princess of Asturias in 1497, Duchess Consort of Savoy between 1501 and 10, and then governor of the Habsburg Netherlands between 1507 and 30. Including the peace between starting in 1509 to 1520, which was a peace treaty for a while until the fight went on. She was an avid collector and had a beautiful palace in Malines, in northeastern of Brussels. Absolutely beautiful place that is still there and is now the Palace of Justice in Malines. In that place, she collected tremendous amount of objects. She was one of the first women collectors at that time. There was another one, but we'll talk about her later. And this is just a picture I took of the former Palace of Savoy, which is now the Palace of Justice. So that's the Gothic aisle, but then the rest that is in the foreground is more Renaissance in style. She had a tremendous quantity of art of all kinds because her nephew was not too fond of collecting. So a lot of things that he had received from the New World, for example, is going to end up there. She was so known for her collection that Dürer came to visit the palace. And other artists would come and get the permission to visit the palace because she had lots of paintings of the family, but she had other works we'll see in a minute, and a great collection of manuscripts and sculptures. The famous Van Eyck was in her hands and actually went back to Spain with her. Actually, no, when she died, she gave it to a Spaniard who took it to Spain. But she had a whole series of extremely top quality manuscripts. This is probably one of the nicest, and I have a facsimile there on the table, so if you want to look at it. It's tiny. It's 8.9 inches by 5.9 inches. So imagine, let me just. This is the size. Oh, wow. So it's really important to realize how small these were, and absolutely delightful illustration here. So what you see here is actually showing Mary of Burgundy sitting down and reading a book of ours, sorry, here. And she has that vision that in the church next to her, there is the Virgin, and she is there together with her husband and some friends of hers behind. And so you have that absolutely delightful vision, and then you have beautiful irises that were a symbol of the Passion of Christ, and some jewelry and some carnation and a rosary and some pearls there on the windowsill. Just a beautiful work. This is another page to show you the refinement of the illustration. Another very important book of ours is the Sforza Hours that is now in the British Museum, made in collaboration between an Italian painter and a Flemish painter. And as you can see, Elizabeth has been given the face of Margaret of Austria. Another one that is quite interesting is the troops of Malebouche attacked the Castle of Women. And I brought it in because of to give you an idea of the spirit at that time. Women had started rebelling against some of the statement by men that women had to just stay at home and they were stupid, that none were geniuses, couldn't be artists, which wasn't true. A lot of women were making illumination for manuscripts. And the story is absolutely adorable, where you have all the males that are here attacking the castle where only women could be. And so you have women defending themselves with bows and arrows. This book had been given to the Duke of Burgundy, John the Good. And you see him dressed in black, by the way. And then he gave it to his niece. And here you have a detail, so you can see the poet who wrote the thing is just sitting very quietly in the garden there and thinking, but you have all these men, attacking the castle of women, and they're defending themselves against all these arrows. So this was the beginning of revolution for women, but it took only, 800 years to come to fruition. Also, she was a protector of Jan Gossart, who was a painter of the Flemish painter of the 16th century that was called a Romanist because he was influenced by Rome. And of course, as everybody at that time, she had a superb collection of tapestries. And she was in the right place because Malines was one of the places where tapestries were woven. It still is, by the way. It still has a superb factory there that makes tapestries with modern design, but also restores antique tapestries. And the book that I have there shows a lot of tapestries that spent a couple of years in Malines from the collection of the Royal Collection of Spain that were given to them for restoration. And they thanked Belgium by lending them these tapestries for an exhibition for 6 months. It was absolutely superb. Brussels was also known, and they were Oudenaarde. There were 3 or 4 different places where they had these where the tapestries were made. Literally, when Raphael designed cartoons at that time for tapestries, they were sent to Brussels to be woven. So it was so important. So these tapestries were often, the regular tapestries were made of wool, but for the kings, typically it was wool, silk, gold, and silver. And so I just show you here one, but this would be part of a series that could be up to 12 tapestries with a narrative showing different important rulers, for example, because the kings wanted to compare themselves to Caesar or to Aeneas and so on. So you have always these interesting stories, or you have stories of the Bible. Tapestries had an important role at that time, more than paintings, because tapestries could be portable. You could fold them and take them to the next castles where you would go. And then you would hang them and you were at home. It would protect you against the cold. It would, because you have some air between the tapestries and the wall, so it would literally insulate the room from the cold and the humidity. It would buffer the sound, that in these large rooms you would have an echo. This would prevent the echo. And on top of that, it decorated the place. So a very important thing. And as I mentioned, she also inherited some of the works that were coming from the New World. And I give you an example. This is the so-called feather cloak of Moctezuma, so all made of feathers. And then masks and so on. These are just examples of the kind of things she would have. And of course, at the beginning of the 16th century, we have the Reformation, which is going to call for counter-Reformation. And this is going to make it for very difficult times in Northern Europe, where you will have a lot of demolition of churches and the looting, prevalent looting. And the church tried to react with the Council of Trent and insist on the importance of religious imagery. So here's to give you an idea of the empire, the Habsburg Empire. Everything that you see there in orange was part of the Habsburg Empire. And this is, of course, before Charles V stepped down. And so when he did what he split, he kept this part, and then this was given to Ferdinand. But of course, what you have too is you have the New World. So it's a huge chunk of territory. Charles V was a lot on the battlefield, but he met Titian when he was in Italy and wanted to have a portrait similar to the Duke of Mantua with his dog that Titian had painted. And he loved that painting. He said, I want something similar. And Titian made this painting with a tall dog next to him. And he loved it so much that he said, from now on, you'll be the only painter that I will sit for. And it's only Titian who could paint him after that. Titian made a very memorable painting of Charles on horseback, in actually looking at Roman sculptures as a model. And this became a model for all other leaders that wanted to be portrayed on a horse. It became really the base for all these. He also called on Italian sculptors, Leone Leoni, and so will Philippe II will go on with him, where he's going to sculpt. This is just a bust, but there is an entire statue made of that too. When Mary of Austria, Margaret of Austria died, it's Mary of Austria, the sister of Charles V, who's going to become the governor of the Low Countries. She was Queen of Hungary and Bohemia between 1516 and 1526, but very reluctantly accepted to become the governor of the Habsburg Netherlands. Whereas Margaret was quite at ease with that position, Mary wasn't at all. And it's really her brother had almost to blackmail her for her to accept. But she was there between 1531 and 1555. One of the palaces and that was one of part of the bargain for her to come, is her brother had to build her a beautiful palace, and he did. This is in the southern part of Belgium, in Binche, where they have, by the way, an extraordinary carnival that dates back. And this is a reconstruction of that beautiful palace that was built, of which only this is left. Unfortunately, there was a feud between the King of France and Mary, and the King of France took his revenge by destroying that palace that was considered at the time. One of the most beautiful palaces in Europe. And here's an idea of the large room, the reception room. This is actually where Charles V abdicated. This is where he decided to step down from his position. His health was not good, and it was becoming too much of a burden. But to give you an idea of the proportions of that room, it's absolutely incredible. And of course, all this had to be decorated. So you have at that time commissioned for painters and for a weaver to make tapestries. And this is what you see on the wall there, by the way, are all tapestries. She also had the palace of Chateau of Marimont. That was a nice place again because they could hunt, a lot of forest at that time. And she is the one who acquired also from a church, and they were not too much in agreement with it, but she insisted, but the very famous Van der Weyden Descent of the Cross. It's almost as famous as the Ghent altarpiece. That painting that is still in the Prado. And when you go to the Prado, it's at the end. There are many galleries, and it's just at the end of it, and you can see it from far away because the colors are so extraordinary. And again, a very influential painting that inspired so many people. Roger van der Weyden, slightly younger than Jan van Eyck, but his contemporary, made this painting for a Brotherhood of Crossbowmen. And so you can see in the corner what is considered as decoration is in fact a crossbow on both sides to indicate that it is for them. It was the altarpiece for their church, their chapel. But Mary fell in love with that painting and absolutely wanted it. So finally she could purchase it under the condition that a copy was going to be made and replace the Van der Weyden. And once she decided to step down from her governorship, she moved to Spain and took it with her. Just to show you the incredible realism of the painting. Look at these tears. You want to wipe them off. Somebody's thinking, yeah. That's the head of the Virgin. and then Christ. And you can see that he as the head is on the side, you can see that when he was standing and still alive, the blood had run vertically on his forehead. And so it's an extraordinary painting. I love it. So his son, Philip II, is going to inherit the throne of Spain. He's going to be king of Spain from 56 to 98. He will marry the Queen Mary of England and become the King of England and Ireland between 1554 and 58. And then, because the King of Portugal dies without heir, he's going to become King of Portugal too, between 1580 and 98. So he will marry Mary of Portugal, Mary of England, Elizabeth of Valois, and Anna of Austria, and he will stop there. As you can see, look at Maria Manuela of Portugal died after 2 years of marriage. That's in childbirth. Mary of England in 58. Elizabeth of Valois will survive for 9 years, and Anna of Austria 10 years. At that time, Philip is deciding that he will settle the royalty in Madrid. And at that time, the palace in Madrid was the old Alcazar, the Moor Alcazar that had been turned into a palace. Not too comfortable. And Madrid is a beautiful city, but it has extreme temperatures. It's in the center, it has a continental climate. So it's very hot in the summer and it can be very cold in the winter. So this is that Alcazar that was up there on the hill and that was turned into a palace. But of course, it wasn't that comfortable. So they're going to start building smaller palaces around that are more comfortable. And also, as I said, that is going to be able to sustain the court from time to time. Philip II is going to inherit that love for Titian. And so he's going to commission Titian to build, and we're not sure, 6 or 7 paintings that are called the Poésie, the poetry. They all related to Ovid's works and talk about the loves of Zeus. So this is when Philip was young, unmarried. And so these paintings are all very explicit. This is Danae with a nurse. And what you see there is that shower of gold that Zeus is transforming himself into so he can approach Danae in a very intimate way.
We're not.
Venus and Adonis. These are the only 2 that are left in Spain. The others ended up in different countries, including the Gardner Museum in Boston. The famous Rape of Europa. These paintings you might have seen somewhere else too, because when Rubens spent some time in Madrid, he made some sketches of these paintings and later on reproduced them all by heart, and literally 25 years after having seen them. So it's incredible. And they're absolutely identical. It also, Philip decided he wanted a large palace outside of Madrid in a better climate. And this is in a kind of a wooded but also hilly region northwest of Madrid. So he built the Monasterio of San Lorenzo de la Escorial in memory of a winning battle in northeast France, Saint-Quentin. And he decided he wanted to have it as a monastery and as a residence. It's a huge, huge building that contains a basilica that you see in the center with a large dome that is inspired by St. Peter.
And I'm sorry, we're still on the Rape of
yes,
Europa.
I'm sorry, here you are. Thank you. And so you get in, and then you have a big court. You enter the basilica, and you have a. This is facing west, and so the south wing was the monastery at that time occupied by Hieronymites. And then you had the rest was the palace with galleries and lots of beautiful courtyards that were beautifully landscaped. Here you have a map. No, sorry. That's not the one. Apologize. That's the wrong. That's the Alcazar. I had changed it, but it didn't pick up on it. Sorry. But online you can see that beautiful construction, huge collection of paintings there, also for decoration. But then he wanted also some other palaces, and he built the palace of Aranjuez in the south of Madrid, where they would go again. It had lots of woods around, so they could hunt, and they were escaping from the heat in Madrid. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Online, you have things that unfortunately my others had. In the Escorial, beside the monastery, there were 3 libraries with incredibly rare books. Unfortunately, 2 of the libraries caught fire, and a lot were lost too. So this is the Palace of Aranjuez. You can see beautiful gardens, and this is the way it looks nowadays. He collected, as you can see, beautiful codices. This is related to the one that we saw some weeks ago, the Beatus that we saw some weeks ago is the same series. It's part of the same period. And a part of the text, you have the first Arabic numeral in the West that appear there on the right. The 9876, that's the first time that these characters that are Arab characters appear in the book. He also collected works by Hieronymus Bosch, and this is the outside wings of the Gardens of Earthly Delight. And when you open it, you have the incredible amount of frightening figures, again, totally inspired by alchemical symbols. And it's too long to explain, but you have that fusion of different figures. And of course, on the left, the creation of man and woman. And then you have all the animals. But what is interesting is not everybody is right. Look at the cat is going away with a mouse in his mouth. So nature is gone. Other works by Hieronymus Bosch, The Adoration of the Magi. And here the Haywain, this is again a triptych. So this is the outside of the wings. And you have here again all that fantasy of Hieronymus Bosch. Also, he has that famous tabletop that you can see in the room where the Hieronymus Bosch are, showing the 7 deadly sin and the 4 last things here on all around in these small circles. And here you have the eye of God looking at you sinning. So you have wrath at the bottom, envy, greed, gluttony, and sloth, and pride. These were very dangerous sins. Also, as we mentioned, an incredible amount of tapestries. I just show you one example. And these are huge. So this was the fifth tapestry of the story of Scipio. So once Philip dies, his successor is Philip III, who marries another Margaret of Austria, not to be confused with the first one. And he will be king of Spain and Portugal between 1598 and 1621. He is not going to do a lot of collecting. He will be at war, as many of these are. And he is the family tree for the second part of them. And I propose that we just take a break. You have some water and some coffee at the back, as well as some cookies, so that you can digest all the. Yeah, here's the.
Yeah, I think if you're smart, you're also.
It's too long for me to explain because it's so difficult to understand. With tons of interpretation. And there's all that reading, but and after it was very fun to me. Because we had that best, we had spaces and all the chemical aspects. And his son, his father-in-law was a so he was very familiar with that. Yeah.
Going to see you tomorrow.
Yes, very briefly, because I have a appointment at one.
Oh,
So
well,
that's.
that's.
But I might go from the area starting.
Is it, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been interested and this is the one that's. Melody. Yeah. That's right, because I showed you. So I just. Yeah, then I started thinking, that's how it is.
Yeah. The sun
It's no, and then I say that. It's how.
There was a new.
I mean, she's.
So that's.
It's a good to have it. It is.
And they carry that.
I know, mom.
And replicate the memories, the family traces, the person.
You know, that.
That made the diagram.
She was a dear. She was so.
Quick, they have the apps for the. Anything that works.
This is a ride, love it.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah. You see, if they hand the four. And you find the 13, but no, the sister.
Then it's like.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have John, I say, the last of the household. Yeah.
I did Steve on him.
And here is a French king that this is where the Bourbon comes. Yes, we have the war of secession. Nobody wants the other to become the next on the throne. Because it's going to be very powerful. So finally it's French the brother of the Queen becomes this. And I didn't even finish it. I didn't go further because they don't really good, but then you have the Queen Isabel, who's going to be on the throne for 15 years. They had a queen there in Spain.
Yes.
Yeah, in Austria they had. Nobody else.
Now it's always, you don't have to tell me, it's constant.
They're around, they're gonna say post yes. Post yes before you go.
Oh, God.
Okay, I think we should start again because we still have quite a bit of material.
I can see that.
But the beginning, the beginning is important. So
I had to go, my daughter, is.
Could somebody, yes, could somebody turn the lights, please? Okay, so there we are, we go on. And here you have the second part of the family tree. In white, you have the French kings, and in red, the Spanish kings. And so you can see the inbreeding goes on. So the sister of Louis XIII is going to marry Philippe IV, who is going to have multiple wives too because they die. And the Louis XIV marries Maria Theresa of one of the daughters of Philippe IV. Balthazar Carlos, unfortunately, he was the heir, but he's going to die young. And it's Charles II who is going to inherit the throne, and he's the end of the Habsburg. He's so inbred, he's so deformed that the stories that you hear that he refused to be bathed and he would go for 7 years without ever being bathed. People didn't want to come close to him. He could barely eat because his jaw, they had the Habsburg, they inherited the Habsburg jaw that had the bottom part, the chin was very prominent. And so with all that inbreeding, it became worse and worse. And so the two part of the jaw were not aligned, and he couldn't eat, he couldn't bite. And he was incapable of procreating. And so he died without heirs. And that is going to become the big problem, war of succession. All the big powers in Europe are going to fight to propose a new heir to the throne. And it's finally the French who are making it. And it's the Philippe d'Orléans, who is the uncle of Louis XV. As you can see, Louis XIV is the great-grandchild of Louis XIV. They all die of smallpox. And even his two older brothers are going to die before him. He's going to be the one who is going to survive. And so it's the uncle of Louis XIV who is going to become the new king of Spain. And there goes the thing, you know, the tree. Louis is going to die young, and Fernando is going to inherit. And here we don't have much, we'll see, we don't have much collecting. But here with Carlos III and particularly Carlos IV, Carlos IV will see Goya is going to be patroned by Carlos IV. And of course, Philip IV is going to be the patron of Velázquez and Rubens. And so these are the two big, the most important collectors we'll see in this part. So Philip IV, and you can see there that the Habsburg jaw, Charles V already had it. He's going to be King of Spain between 1621 and 65, so a long reign, and King of Portugal from 21 to 40. And in 40, there is a revolution in Portugal, and they kick the Spaniards out with great delight. And so we see the two wives of Philip IV, Elizabeth of France, from 1615 to 44, and then Mariana of Austria between 49 and 65. And this is when Rubens comes into the picture. What happens is that Rubens was working, if you remember, for the Duke of Mantua, and the Duke of Mantua is going to send him together with a shipment of beautiful horses and paintings as a gift to the king. And so there is Rubens on the ship that goes from Livorno, I think, all the way to Spain. The king is not where he's supposed to have been, and so they have to find him. The travel has been really bad. These large canvases that he's transporting suffer during the trip. He has to restore them because they had storms, and despite the fact they were very well wrapped, some humidity went into it and really made some damage. And so he meets the king, who is very impressed. Even young Rubens had quite a bit of countenance. He had the presence. He spoke 6 languages. He was an interesting person. And so he's going to paint one of these Adoration of the Magi, that absolutely superb in his very typical style, inspired by Titian and by by Michelangelo that he has seen during his 10 years in Italy. Also the beautiful colors. And there he's going to meet Velázquez. And Velázquez, these are early paintings while he was still in Seville. If you don't know, this is the water cellar, the famous water cellar. The one in the center is the one that we all know, but there were 3 versions. And so the one with the hat is in the Uffizi Gallery, and the Walters Museum for the one on the left, and then the Walter Museum on the right. These paintings, as you see, Wellington Museum, this was one painting that belonged to the crown, and we'll see what's going to happen, and it's going to be donated by the next king to Wellington to thank him of having kicked out the French. And Velázquez becomes a court painter, and he makes, of course, the necessary portraits of Philip IV in black, as you can see. But it's not always going to be. He's starting to paint. So this is he's still young. This is the Triumph of Bacchus, or called by the Spaniards Los Borrachos, which means the drunk. And it's interested because it's influenced by Caravaggio and by other painters of the Baroque period in Italy, and he saw that. But again, Rubens visits again in 28, 29, so that's his second visit, and he is going to paint the whole family. This is a copy after Peter Paul Rubens of painting that was lost, of Philip IV on a horse. And after his trips to Italy, Velázquez is really maturing, and he also, as the court painter, is going to make a whole series of painting of the family. This is the Prince Balthazar Carlos with a dwarf. Dwarfs were often used as, because they were adults, they were no children, but they were an easy way to control the kids because they looked like the same size and so on, but they had the wisdom of adults, often were quite smart. And not only the kids used dwarf, but also the princes. And often they became confidants and even advisors sometimes. Another painting of Philip IV with the brown and silver, and this is absolutely superb. This is where the brush of Velázquez becomes very free, and look at just the detail on how he makes these embroideries just with touches of the brush. Philip IV is going to build more castles. This is the Palacio del Buen Retiro around. No, it's not far from the Escorial. It shouldn't be El Escorial. I don't know why I put that. But no, that's the. No, it's not the Escorial. So that's one of the palaces that he did. That one had to be built rather fast. It's huge, and it's going to pay the price because the building materials were not up to the task. And this is all is left of the palace, only 2 pavilions. They were destroyed by the Austrians during one battle. This is the way, again, that they would collect art. So this was to decorate all these palaces they had. And so they had new painters, court painters. And you can see here some paintings that we will see later on. The portraits on horseback of the king and the queen. And this is the interior of one of these. He also ordered at that time a whole series of battle paintings to decorate that place, the Buen Retiro. This is one by Velázquez, the famous surrender of Breda, called also Las Lanzas. But there is 7 other paintings that were decorated, just that one room of the battle room, it's called. He collected, paintings by Claude Lorrain. This is one example, but he had many, 4 or 5 of Claude Lorrain, a French painter who spent most of his career in Rome. And one of the first to focus on the real light, either early in the morning or late at night, where he would have these spectacular views of the sunset or sunrise. And Nicolas Poussin, another French painter that spent most of his career in Italy, more poetic than Claude Lorrain. He always included some scenes that related to classical authors or the Bible. And here are these famous paintings of by Velázquez of the Philip IV on horseback. His son, Balthazar Carlos, who was very promising. Unfortunately, he's going to die too young. And then the one on the right of the Queen is by the workshop. It's not by Velázquez himself. And more portraits. This is a portrait as a huntsman. And this was to decorate the Torre de la Parada. That was another small hunting lodge that they had around Madrid. As I mentioned, they used dwarf. This is Francisco Lescano, El Niño de Vallecas, that was at the court, and they were quite appreciated. It was really interesting because you see an interest of Velázquez and other painters later on these creatures. And 2 of his paintings of the philosophers, Aesop on the left and Menippus on the right, very much influenced by the Baroque painters, Italian Baroque painters. His collection was huge. He included a lot of paintings by Rubens. I just bring a few. The Judgment of Paris on the left, in the middle, the Rape of Deidamia, and the rest on the flight into Egypt. These are just a few by Rubens, but also some Italian painter by Paolo Veronese, Venus and Adonis, Raphael, the Holy Family, and Titian, the Offering to Venus. Just a few of the paintings that he did. By the way, I forgot to finish the story of the poetry. When Philip II got married, these paintings had to go because they were all nudes, and there's no way that the women would have accepted that. So at that time, they kept two paintings, but that were put on a completely different part of, and probably the queen had no access to it. But the paintings were dispersed at that time. One more of the portraits, but it shows Philip IV, who is really sad. Isabella, his wife, died in 1644, and in 46, his son Balthazar, who was the heir, died at 17, so very young. And this is, of course, when he's going to remarry and have the son Carlos II. Just a few portraits of the women, very typical fashion in Spain, which is particular to Spain, very wide dresses. It's the same, mimicking the dresses is the hairdo, has almost the same shape. Portrait of Mariana of Austria, and the famous Las Meninas, the Maids of Honor. And that one it's a very difficult painting again to understand because it shows so many different layers. You have Velázquez himself, who is painting that huge canvas that you see there, but who is he painting? Because he's looking next to it there. And what seemed to be the solution is that you see a mirror in the back with the queen and the king that are looking at them. And then you have the little infanta here, Margaret of Austria. Not so, Margaret, just like this, with maids of honors and so on, and a big dog, of course. And it's beautiful because you have the light, natural light bathing them. And they've been very smart. I think it's still the way when I was at the Prado, they positioned the painting next to a window. So you had the light bathing the painting the same way it was conceived. So you have Velázquez, Infanta Margarita. The person who leaves the place, so going through the door. And then you have different, that's a nun, Guardadamas, and Dona Isabel de Velasco, Infanta Margarita, and Marie Barbola is the dwarf. Now, it's interesting because the little girl was promised to her uncle, who was the Emperor of Austria. And so Velázquez had to make all these portraits to be sent to Austria so that he could see the progress of her growing up. And you see her at 3-year-old, at 5-year-old, at 8-year-old, at 9-year-old. And then finally, at the age of 14, she's sent to Austria. And here's a portrait by Juan Bautista del Mazo, showing her in black and not smiling. She was not allowed to smile. That was the etiquette. So she looks incredibly somber. And there is her uncle and husband, Kaiser Leopold I. Unfortunately for her, she gave birth to 6 children, of whom survived only one, and then she died. So she died I'm trying to find again. She died in 73. She was 23. And then there is the painting you've already seen because it went in through different hands. That was in Mantua. It was a painting in Mantua that went to Charles II and then came to Spain, La Perla by Raphael. The successor is the poor guy, Charles II. Charles II, they tried to marry him, but of course, as I say, couldn't perform. And so they died without children in 1700, and then came the War of Succession. And the winner was Philip V of Bourbon, who became King of Spain from 1700 to 24, then was kicked out and came back and was from 24 to 46. Married Marie-Louise Gabriella of Savoy and Elizabeth Farnese. This was, of course, refreshing the blood. It was a different kind, though the French were not as inbred as the Spaniards or the Austrian. And of course, the face of collecting completely changed. What happens is that now he's French, he has French tastes, and he's going to bring his own artists to the court. We'll see Rond and we'll see Van Loo, all painters that were in France and that he brought with him. And he's going to have these big family portraits like Louis Michel Van Loo, who is of a family of painters that worked for Louis XIV too. One thing that the king is going to do is going to create a tapestry factory in Madrid, because they could not depend from the one in the Low Countries. As he was French, he was the enemy. And so the factories in Belgium could not deliver anymore. And so this is a factory that he will create that was founded in 1720. And some other paintings of Jean Ranc, of Louis I, so his son. Very French style. You see a completely different, the fashion changed so dramatically that it shocked all the Spaniards because they didn't recognize themselves. And the building of palace continues. This is La Granja in Ildefonso. And big problem, the Alcazar in 1734 on New Year's Eve, the Christmas Eve, is going to catch fire and it's going to burn completely. Fortunately, they're able to rescue some of the paintings, including the Meninas. The only way to rescue was to cut it off the frame and throw it through the window. But a lot of the Titian paintings they had and many others were lost into that fire. And so after a few decades, it's the new palace that's going to be built, began in 1735, and is that huge structure. Definitely it's going to be more comfortable. It has an Italian, the architects were Francesco Juvara, followed by Sabatini. And the new king is going to be Ferdinand VI, who marries a Portuguese princess, who's going to be king from 46 to 59. Didn't do much on collection, but Charles III of Bourbon and marries Maria Amalia of Savoy. He is going to start decorating the new palace, and he's going to call on Tiepolo, the wonderful Italian Rococo painter, to paint the ceilings. And at that time, Tiepolo is towards the end of his career. He's a Venetian painter, but has done things internationally. And he comes with his two sons who work with him, and they're going to decorate many of the ceilings in the palace. But he comes there, and there is a German painter who is also there, who is starting a new style. And we're talking about Anton Mengs. Anton Mengs, who is what you call the neoclassical painter, who sees things very differently. The Rococo was frivolous, was really pretty. He wants something much more rational. And so here we have now that new guy who hates Tiepolo. And poor Tiepolo, he's there trying to finish his career properly, and he's going to be mocked all the time by Manx. He's going to be very nasty. And he's going to die actually in Spain. So here is Manx, the portrait of the future Charles IV of Spain and his wife, Marie Louisa of Spain. And they are going to, after Manx leaves, they're going to use Goya as a new court painter. And Goya is going to start by making cartoons for tapestries, because tapestries are still in favor, because they needed to decorate all these palaces. And so as you can see here, this is for El Pardo, for the dining room. 13 cartoons of the 4 seasons and social themes. This was the commission. And so he shows different things, not too funny for a dining room, but these are the type of paintings. So these are cartoons. They're not what you would call the finished painting, but they were what the weaver, when you have a vertical loom, the painting would be there and the weavers would be this making the knots, you know, on this side. And the tapestry always ends up being the mirror image of the cartoon because he's looking at it, but the good part of the tapestry is on that side, if you want. So in that new tapestry factory, they make tapestry for the king. Here are for the bedchambers, a series of 7 cartoons projected, only 1 was achieved. Much nicer, the dancing, but as you see, in a typical traditional costume, not French looking. And I found the real tapestries in the Royal Palace in Brussels. Here are some tapestries in the Royal Palace in Brussels, so you can see how they look once they are made into tapestries. Still in El Pardo for the infant bedchamber, but was not executed, a very large painting that shows the panorama of the palace on the other side of the Manzanares River that contours Madrid. And just a few portraits. This is Charles III in hunting costume. Less royal than the others when you see that. It's much more easygoing. Succeeded by Charles IV of Bourbon, who will be king of Spain between 98 and 1808, with Maria Luisa of Parma. And guess what? She was the one that was wearing the pants in the couple. She was the one that was in charge of the administration. He was a rather weak person, but in fact, it was what you call a trinity of power. So you had the king on the left, you had the queen, who was very strong-willed, and then you had Godoy, Manuel Godoy, who was the Duke of Alcudia and a whole series of titles, who was in fact in charge. But he was supposed, a lot of people thought that he was the lover of the queen. So a very difficult situation, but the king was kind of blind. And it's an interesting interaction between these. Here are some portraits by Goya on the left and by Mengs on the right of the king and the queen. But she's still really pretty when she's young, but she's not going to turn not too well. The famous portrait, and here you can see her, this is the portrait by Goya of the whole family. And copying Velázquez, you have Goya here with the canvas. So it's like he's making a portrait of the whole group. And he's not idealizing them. He's very true to the reality. And so they're not particularly good looking. And the king is going to love the portrait. So he was not aware of, if you want, some of the weaknesses, but you have there the king, the queen, and their whole family with Goya in the back. So they're known to have made 4 journeys to Aranjuez in 1800 to paint the portrait of the royal family. And he went on doing some cartoons. And this is before his disease. This is just when he's going to become sick. At the end of the 18th century, Goya becomes sick, very sick he takes about 2 years to recover, and he's going to become completely deaf following his disease. And unfortunately, because of the deafness and the terrible headaches that he gets with it, his style is going to change completely, and his paintings are going to become darker and darker. These are still kind of funny, still for decoration. But then he takes his distance from the court, despite the fact he's court painter, but he's going to take his distances, and ultimately he's going to move to France. And then what happens is that Napoleon doesn't like the king. He thinks he's very weak, and it's a whole plot. He pretends that he comes to help the Spaniards against the Portuguese, and in fact he invades the place. And he replaces the king by his own brother, Joseph the first, who becomes, Joseph Bonaparte becomes José the First. And he is married to Julie Clary, which is a big romance, by the way. There are lots of books written on that. So Joseph is there. He is not particularly good. He's going to be kicked out by the British. And on his way out, he's been arrested while being in his carriage. And in his carriage, he had tons of paintings that he had taken with him of the collection, smaller paintings. They stop him. They, of course, recover all the paintings. And the head of the British army that was going to help them was Wellington. Oh. And so the king, Ferdinand, who becomes king again, is going to donate 80 of the paintings to Wellington. And the Wellington collection in London, the core of the collection are these 80 paintings that were donated to Wellington by the King of Spain. So I'm not going any further in the family tree because it only stops when Franco steps in, but they don't do much collecting after that of any value, let's say. So just let's look at where they are now. So you have a museum that I didn't know, and when I was last in Madrid, it wasn't built yet. It's the Royal Collection Museum that contains a lot of the very old works that used to be in the Prado, but their collection having expanded, they couldn't keep it. So there is a lot of that, and artifacts, art decorative, and some tapestries too. Of course, the Prado, that has most of the collections, but also the Royal Palace. You have lots of the tapestries. Unfortunately, they don't bring them out very often. As it is textile, they cannot leave them out for more than 3 months at a time because they get faded with the light and so on. They also are in the palaces like El Pardo and El Buen Retiro and so on, and El Escorial have lots of the collection too. Now, what is lost? A fire at the Pardo in 1604 that took about 200 of the paintings that were in the palace. In 1714, the Torre de la Parada was destroyed by fire when taken by the Austrian troops in the War of Spanish Succession. In 1734, the Royal Alcazar of Madrid was completely destroyed by fire. It started in the studio of a painter, by the way, in the Alcazar. In 1755, at that time, a lot of works had been given to Portugal by the king. And in 1755, you had that disastrous earthquake in Lisbon that is going to demolish the Ribera Palace, where the King of Spain, of Portugal was supposed to stay, and the art was destroyed. And then in 1813, the 80 paintings donated to Wellington. Now, for those of you that were there, you saw this, but the little painting, the Arnolfini wedding by Van Eyck, or the portrait actually of the Arnolfini, was made by Van Eyck, passed, of course, to the patron Arnolfini. When he died, it was inherited by Diego de Guevara, who gave it to Margaret of Austria, who we talked at length here. She gave it to her niece, Mary of Hungary, who brought it back to Spain when she moved back to Spain and bequeathed it to Philip II. Philip II, after that, so when Joseph Bonaparte was King of Spain, he took it in his carriage. It was a small painting, beautiful. He took it with him. But one of the colonels that were there, James Hay, pretended to have bought the painting from a guy in Waterloo, where he had been attended the fight there. But we know that is not true. So he was also with Wellington, probably took the painting without declaring it, brought it back to England, and through the intervention of Thomas Lawrence, the painter Thomas Lawrence, he proposed it to the Prince Regent George, who kept it for 2 years, and then after 2 years returned it, didn't care for it, and returned it to James Hay, who finally put it in an exhibition, and it was bought by the National Gallery for £600. And this is where it is now. So just to give you an idea of how paintings go from hand to hand and end up in a place where you don't expect. I never understood until now why that superb painting is at the National Gallery, but this is the way it was. So anyway, I hope you had an overview of what it is. There's tons of paintings I couldn't show you. And we have coming the first Tuesday of December, we'll have Rodin, The Gates of Hell, just focusing on that one, which has a lot of things to say about. And on the 9th of December, Perrin McEwen, who's here, will talk to us about the art of the Mughal Empire. And in January 13th, he will finish the series on Jackson Pollock. Thank you so much. And happy Thanksgiving. Yeah, we put the light. Let me just stop the recording here and